I'll be honest with you, before making this video, I have never actually played Mag, and what a mistake that was, because this frame is genuinely so insanely strong, and it's kind of crazy that there is a common misnomer that even though she is a starter frame, she is too complicated or too complex for the average player to choose, because even with 0 mods on base star chart, she is doing this. Yes, this is literally a frame you can get before your very first bullet jump. Mag, or Owie, whatever you want to call her, is nuts. I think it's about time we got her very own perfected episode. I could probably rant on for the next few minutes as to why Mag is one of the best Warframes in 2024, and why she is definitely the best starter frame, but why waste time with all that when instead of telling you, I can just show you. Mag's passive is honestly way underrated, but I can't really blame people for seeing it that way, because for a while it was genuinely useless. Her passive is a carbon copy of the vacuum or fetch mod if you turn the range down on them to 8 meters. It unfortunately will not stack with said mods, and is why for literally ever, nobody cared about it, because you would always have space for those kind of mods on your companion. But we in 2024 now, which is a post-Abyss of Dagoth and Kome and the Five Fates environment, where companions are incredibly strong, and more so, really tight on mod space. So being able to save an entire slot because her passive negates the need for fetch is really useful. Next up though is something that for quite a while now has actually been pretty positively received, and that is Pull, her first ability. Pull is simple in effects, yet executes them extremely well. Casting costs 25 energy, where then a magnetic vortex will be generated in front of Mag. Note that the placement will always occur in the direction of your reticle, but the actual vortex itself will generate a few meters in front of Mag's hip. The effect present following that is a very aggressive pull on all enemies within the base 25 meter range, a 90-degree cone, and within loose line of sight, by which I mean as long as you can see some part of the enemy on screen and they are obviously within the other parameters, they will be pulled. Otherwise, enemies that are within 6 meters of Mag herself in any direction will also be pulled towards this vortex. Do note that that radius is unadjustable by range. Simultaneously, they will suffer 300 magnetic damage and be ragdolled, which opens them up to melee ground finishers. Importantly, pull is a one-handed action, which means that things like reloading, shooting, moving, etc. can still occur while casting, which is far more useful than you think it is, trust me. Its augment of greedy pull, while not being featured in any builds today, is actually quite useful, causing pull to also drag in any sort of pickup on cast, this functioning the same as it would for enemies. Honestly, this one sees marginal use on Mag herself for me. Rather, I love using this one on Zaku, as it is a helmet, and their Vast in Time is a great box breaker, so when combined with pull, makes them a fantastic looter frame for running through missions while their guns solo everything, and you drag in all the loot from all the boxes. Anyways, pull, really good, better than you probably thought it was. Magnetize though? Yeah, this is the one responsible for all those crazy ass bag clips you see in shorts or in some videos, because this is what it allows you to do. This is also by far her strongest ability in terms of raw damage, and definitely the most complex, so stick with me here, it's a good one. There are 2 versions of Magnetize, both costing 50 energy to cast, and like Pull, is a one-handed action. For all intents and purposes, the tap or targeted version of Magnetize is the only one we care about and will make use of. The hold or protective version does look really cool, but is really not that useful. Requiring an enemy to cast on, once done, the initial target will be anchored in place, entirely immobilized, as a base 4 meter sphere encompasses them, dragging in all enemies within 8 meters as well. This pull will continue to take effect as long as, and don't ask me why, the initially cast upon enemy's model is still being rendered, dead or not. So yes, you can kill them and the pull will still exist, but probably not for long if using things like heat. The main mechanic present here is that while it is active, all bullets, whether it be from enemies or players, projectiles, and polarized shards, will be redirected towards its center. There is a 2x damage multiplier that does scale with strength applied to said attacks, but it only affects the initially cast upon target. More importantly though, the field will absorb 25% of the damage dealt to it, dealing it per second in full to every enemy within it as magnetic damage in half-second increments. Damage will decrease linearly from the center down to 50% and does not take critical hits into account, though multi-shot, base damage, elemental, and separate projectiles from certain weapons will be taken into account. If the initial target you cast upon dies, the field will destabilize at the end of its duration and deal 300 base blast damage in a scaling 15-meter radius. On top of that, each time an enemy is hit by any sort of damage tick inside the bubble, 100% of that is added onto this explosion and makes it quite the effective area nuke. This probably sounds like a lot, and to be honest with you, it is. So for your sake and a little bit mine, I will break this one down. A massive thank you goes to Suckmunt, another YouTube friend of mine, for helping out not only with the following explanation from his own amazing mag guide, but also for giving me some pointers when I asked him for some help, because he is the mag main. Please go check his channel out. To visually explain everything, we will use an unmodded Archiplasmor which has 600 base damage. We will now cast a bubble onto this level 50 charger as it has no damage reduction of any kind, the recipient of this being another level 50 charger. Casting bubble and firing a single shot, then leaving the bubble alone to run its course, will leave us with a total of 8 damage ticks. The math behind this looks as shown. There is the 8 times we inflict 600 damage on the target times by 0.25 added to the initial 300 base blast damage from the ability, which finalizes us with 1500 damage, and in game, those results are reciprocated. This damage too does decrease linearly within its range and will respect line of sight. All things considered, you cast this one on a big group of enemies, you shoot at them and they get absolutely eviscerated, and then the bubble itself will explode again to kill everything around it. To expedite that process though, the Augment Magnetized Discharge should be used. Magnetized Discharge allows you to recast the ability when aiming at any active bubble to detonate it for no additional energy cost at any time. If they somehow manage to not die from this explosion, there is a scaling chance they will be disarmed beginning at 50% for 100 strength and going up to 100% at 200 strength. Otherwise, it passively adds 45% range to magnetize, which allows it to bypass the traditional 280% range cap for a total 325, which gives 13 meters to the bubble itself in every direction and 48.75 meters to the explosion radius. So besides that, if you thought this ability was good already, when using it with the right weapons, say the Tenet Archiplasmor, Jesus Christ, more on that soon as it is literally mag the gun. Before moving on though, a commonly overlooked aspect of Magnetize is the crowd and area control aspect that it provides. Because all enemy projectiles are redirected into it, placing it down on a choke point will completely negate the ability for you to take any damage from that angle. The only thing is that if you are using it like this, be sure to have the augment on so you can just prematurely explode the bubble so you don't also shut yourself and possibly your teammates off from damaging that angle too. Alright, I believe that takes the cake for the longest ability explanation in recent Kai history, so to solve that, there is Polarize, which is far less complicated. Polarize costs 75 energy to cast and will have Mag emit a spherical pulse of magnetic energy, beginning at 8 meters and expanding outwards for another 5 seconds at 5.9 meters per, totaling to 37.5 meters. If coming into contact with players, them and Mag herself will have their shields refilled by 400, this effect extending to pretty much everything that has shields in the game, from companions to specters to defense objectives, you name it. If it has shields, this ability can increase them. They will not overflow into overshields, but if they come into contact with enemies, one of two things will occur initially. If the enemy has shields, they will be temporarily drained by a base 400. If the enemy has armor, they will be permanently drained by 400, as well as taking true damage equal to the amount removed. Following that, they will produce a violent outburst of magnetic energy that inflicts 250% of the amount of drained shields or armor as magnetic damage to all enemies within 4 meters that does diminish with range, yet is not limited by line of sight, and is increased by 0.55 meters for each meter that the wave covers as it expands. Honestly, I said this one was less complicated than Magnetize, and it is, but after all of that, drained enemies will drop a singular polarized shard that will linger on the ground for 30 seconds, there being a non-scaling 50% chance for them to drop 2. Yeah, this one's also kind of crazy. My bad. By coming within 3 meters of these shards, they will gravitate towards Mag and begin to orbit her rapidly, damaging any enemy that comes within 1 meter of her. This damage begins at 50 and is evenly distributed between Puncture and Slash at 50% per, and that is a forced proc per instance of damage dealt. They will scale beyond that initial 50 dependent on the amount of shields or armor drained on cast, with a 0.25x prefix added onto it too. Now concerning ability synergies, there are none between Pol or Magnetize, but I bring this up now because Polarize does in fact synergize with those two in quite interesting ways. Pull, firstly, will just drag in all the shards within its range to Mag, easing her of the need to go grab them herself, but Magnetize will steal those shards away from her and trap them inside the bubble, where they will then just f it up. This is due to the shards not being limited by any sort of hit registration, and just continually hitting enemies over and over again. There is more to this we will cover later concerning a strong helmet ability interaction and polarized shards being coded as weapons, but for now, this ability is also a one-handed cast, reaping all those benefits on top of everything else. The augment of Counterpulse adds the ability for Polarized to jam enemy weapons and shut off robotic type enemies for 4 seconds when encompassing them. The duration here will scale, though I honestly don't see much use with this one because of the effects present from another augment mod that you must use if you're playing Mag. Still though, for level cap purposes or if you just want an added layer of survivability, this is a pretty damn good one, and it's kind of fun to just shut off all enemies whenever you like. Polarized, while seemingly really good, and it is, ends up being the ability most subsumed over by the general populace because its effects are so hard to notice in general gameplay, and also because the rest of her kit is so good and kinda does everything this ability does alongside other stuff, which is why I say that its effects are hard to notice. Regardless, it's still a really good one, but Crush though? Well, for a minute it might seem underpowered, but you'll see why it is far from that shortly. Casting costs a massive 100 energy and will have Mag somehow magnetize the bones of all enemies within 18 meters, suspending them midair and, wow, this sounds graphic, forcefully compressing their bodies in on themselves to deal 1500 magnetic damage over 3 damage ticks and knocking them down on the 3rd. Additionally, Mag and allies will receive 25 shields per enemy afflicted per tick up to a maximum of 75 per enemy. The damage portion of this ability is kind of irrelevant for anything past Earth, to be honest, but the shields portion, which does overflow into overshields, is so insanely nice and allows you to cap you and your team's shield on every cast in Steel Path. It also, like Polarized, extends to defense objects, specters, companions, etc, etc. It has 0 line of sight checks and is the only full body animation ability present in her kit at base, but as long as you bullet jump into a cast, you should be fine. The only other issue still present here is that insanely long 1.5 second casting time, and that's not gonna roll, so here's what we're gonna do about it. Starting off with the Augment Fracturing Crush. This applies a non-scaling 50% casting speed buff to the ability, complete enemy immobilization, and also allows it to armor strip enemies, beginning at 75% per cast, requiring 134 strength to full strip in a single. Immobilized enemies will be unable to move, though they can still shoot at you, but it is useful nonetheless. It also affects Eximus units. Think of just how crazy everything I just told you is. With its crazy high base range that at 280% goes all the way up to 50.4 meters, it doesn't have an enemy cap, you can both refill your entire shield bar including overshields in every cast, stop every enemy dead in their tracks, and finally remove all of their armor so they pretty much just fall over when you barely even touch them. Yeah, this one is also insanely good. So with the past, let's see, 6 pages of abilities all done and covered, you should understand now why Mag is honestly in contention for one of the best frames in the entire game. What does she not have? One of the strongest damage abilities in Magnetize, fantastic grouping in Pull, Polarize in its multitude of benefits, and Crush. I mean, come on. So what more is there possibly to talk about? Well, besides the helmet setups and synergies I have, there is So moving back on over to Magnetize. Shooting into the bubble will redirect the shots fired back into it, and if you have infinite punch through on the weapon used, well, it will just bounce around in the bubble infinitely, but sadly only hit enemies once due to a term coined by Suckmutt as hit registration. Hit registration is the fact that once an enemy has registered a hit by a projectile, it will be unable to be hit by it again under no circumstance. Sort of, because there are of course exceptions. For us, that's going to consist of either polarized shards just being polarized shards, but the more fun option is absolutely the Tenet Archiplasmor. Archiplasmor's Tenet version is acquired from a sister of Parvos, the progenitor you should use absolutely being heat for reasons to be specified later. Differing it from the base version is its added ability to have shots fired bounce off the first surface they make contact with, which is good alone, but this takes the aforementioned hit registration issue and entirely negates it, as each bounce is technically coded as a new projectile that can again damage the same enemy over and over. But even more powerful is that for whatever reason, each enemy hit also counts as a ricochet, which then again resets the hit registration. And because mag bubbles just group every enemy on top of one another, the two combined together does that. Now, if you thought that was insane, Archiplasmor also happens to be one of the sort of rare weapons that benefits from multiplicative gun CO. Gun CO, or gun condition overload, refers to the galvanized mods of aptitude, savvy, and shot. These mods are pretty much just condition overload but for weapons, adding 40% more damage to enemies per unique status effect present on them, this stacking 2 times up to 80% in galvanized savvy's case. Like 90% of the weapons in game, they will have their damage from this mod be added onto the base damage source increases that you already have, like Prime Point Blank or Primary Merciless. By that I mean, have a full stack of Primary Merciless, but you would just add the damage from Galvanized Savvy onto it. In certain weapon cases though, mostly those who function as a projectile, it will actually multiply with said base damage increases, and this is definitely unintended, but it's been present ever since their introduction and is significantly stronger than if it just additively stacked with them. The statuses applicable to Savvy include the 3 IPS elements, the 13 elemental statuses, the 2 unique ones in Void and Tau, and the 3 hidden statuses of Lifted, Knockdown, and Microwave. So most other mag videos you're gonna see are gonna say that to benefit from this, you should use a primer like Epitaph, but nah, we got something better. Why use a primer when you can build literally every single element on Archiplasmor itself? So when you have heat as the base element from the progenitor, initially you begin with heat and radiation. Add in Prime Charge Shell and Contagious Spread, we can get Corrosive Damage too, Magnetic Strafe afterwards adding said element into the mix also, and finally Chilling Reload to combine with the Progenitor Heat for Blast, which leaves us with Corrosive, Magnetic, Radiation, and Blast. Oh, and Nourish is going to feature on the first build today, so we've got Viral for this one too. Yeah, just consider the fact that all those elements give us damage multis to pretty much every faction, and that Plasma will bounce around a ton in the bubble, which makes triggering these statuses themselves pretty easy. We absolutely want that because firstly, Corrosive will armor strip if they somehow aren't already, Magnetic will increase damage towards shields and overguard, Radiation is actually useless, we can skip that one. Blast though? Blast is blast. More explosions is always going to be good. And Viral? Who doesn't want an at base 2x damage multiplier and at max 3.25x? Though honestly, they won't even survive that long. Yes, this build will one-shot anything at level cap, Acolytes included. So besides all that, Galvanized Diffusion for multi-shot obviously, Cleanse Orkin or your applicable faction for another additional multiplier, use either Vigilante Armaments or any other QOL mod here if you don't want to use them, and then finally Prime Point Blank for our base damage to multiply with Gun CO, as our Arcane slot is filled by Shotgun Vendetta. On achieving a shotgun kill within 5 meters of a target, Vendetta will add 180% more multi-shot and 75% more reload speed to Plasmor, 2 stats that it really loves. Finally, Galvanize Excel to increase the bounces in the bubble. Not that it's needed to be honest, but like, why not? The reason no crit mods are used here is because bubble damage doesn't scale off of them, so it's actually a waste to apply them, but I believe that fully covers Archiplasmor and why it is literally mag the gun. What build is going to be used with this though? Well, as you may have expected and definitely have confirmed, it is Nourish. Don't worry, 2 far more less common builds after this one if you fancy, but Nourish is just really great on mag. Besides the Viral for Plasmor, which we've already covered, mag is a caster frame, and this build having some souped off for 1 really dives into that playstyle, so an energy multiplier is really useful. Viral as a status is also really damn good, which is easily applied to entire tiles from the explosion and our high range stat. Besides that, there is a unique synergy here with Polarized Shards. Polarized Shards are coded as weapons on the back end, which means they benefit from certain universal buffs like Nourish, so now they will deal 75% more damage, and because the shards lack the previously mentioned hit registration issue, they will also proc the viral status itself really damn fast for that 3.25x multiplier. This is a cool and powerful, albeit kind of useless thing because of just how much we spam Plasmor and Magnetize, so even though I've dropped Pull for Nourish on my build, it will work the exact same if you swap that for Polarize and keep Pull. Concerning Mag herself, yeah, I've cooked up 3 crazy builds for you guys, but before that, if you could like this video and subscribe, I would really appreciate it. It helps out, and I have many more plans for so much content to come soon that you definitely don't want to miss. Before the mods, Archon Shards are going to have to be 2 casting speed shards, no foregoing those. Less necessary is a blue Energy Max shard and purple Equilibrium shard, but you'll come to really appreciate them, the purple shard in particular practically working like base Equilibrium because of Nourish's energy multiplier. Besides that, on mag herself, most of the modding choices are going to make a lot of sense based off of what I've said already. Bolt Augment obviously, and then 265 range to scale the Bubble and Crush mainly. The rest of these slots are going to be filled with Growing Power, Blind Rage, Humble Intensify, and Prime Continuity. High strength is really just here to scale nourish, as the rest of her kit doesn't need much past 150 anyways. Duration at 155 is very comfy and means that if you don't want to run blind rage, you can swap it for transient for a slight duration and strength loss and trade for easier energy economy. The same really goes for most of the strength mods too. If you want to run more survivability or casting speed or whatever you want, the build is super open. She's not that stat hungry. Augments wise though, Energize is my only hard recommend, and then I use Augmented, but if you'd rather use anything else, feel free. We build such high range because I find that finding a group of enemies to cast Magnetize on, absolutely obliterating them with Plasmor, and then decasting the bubble to nuke everything else around them is just the best way to play this setup. Throw in the semi-occasional Crush cast for easy survivability and armor stripping, and you are golden. Pair this with any companion you want, though honestly, Panzer with Synth Deconstruct is going to generate a ton of health orbs for the purple shard, Momentous Bond to give our Panzer Claws a ton of status effects for gun CO, and most importantly, Reinforced Bond, which combines with Magnetic Strafe for a total 100% more fire rate. Do note that because Fetch is unneeded on Mag, I actually run all 3 of Panzer's Precept mods alongside the rest of these. Further loadout recs are any secondary you want, a primer being unnecessary, and Praetos per usual because of the movement speed bonuses it provides. Take all those just completely skipped a couple lines. Xenoric for your focus school is good for energy, though not entirely necessary, and that finishes off build number 1. Build number 2 is a way more camping oriented setup that doesn't drop pole, rather polarize for Zada's Whisper. Take all those interactions we just named between Magnetize and Arcoplasmor. Now just double all those things because of Zada's extra hit. Admittedly, there are even more insane interactions here present between Zadas and stuff like Blast, but it's not relevant to what we are trying to do. In this case, we again want max range because you should just find a nice corner to sit in, cast a magnetized bubble, and then spam pull into it as you throw all the enemies into a blender. This is why I don't use magnetized discharge here, because you are just, again, camping, though fracturing does have a benefit for survivability, and if we want to armor strip, it definitely can. Where the camaraderie is here because we aren't using the bubble to nuke anymore, and the Plasmor is exceedingly easy to get headshots with, so 75% more CC on it is pretty nice. Lastly, there is an entirely ability focused DPS build with Thermal Sunder in place of Pull. Sunder is complicated, but in essence, go into your settings, find tap hold abilities, invert the one for Gauss, and now whenever you tap Sunder, you will get heat damage alongside force proccing the status itself. As a DPS ability alone though, it's really not all that great, which is where firstly, the Crush Augment entirely armor stripping helps a ton, and lastly, there is Heat Inherit, which does most of the carrying here. Look, Heat Inherit and Sunder's deeper functions are pretty complicated, so I'm going to refer you to this video that has all of that and more covered in depth. Definitely go watch that if you're interested, but simply, by modding your epitaph with these heat mods, a faction mod, and viral, you can then shoot enemies with the epitaph first to apply at least 1 heat dot, which will then cause all further heat dots applied to an enemy to inherit the modded heat percent and faction damage multiplier from your epitaph. This buffs damage massively and turns Mag into a great area nuke frame by going around casting Crush, priming some enemies up, and then hitting them with Sunder. The damage will get pretty insane. The build is pretty different from the others, requiring lots of efficiency and the inclusion of Archon Vitality to double heat proc damage. Oh, and just because I forgot to mention it, Prime sure-footed in the X list for all of these because I don't know if it's just me, but the amount of Eximus units in mission has just been turned up to 11. I feel like I'm finding one of the Blast Eximi like every 5 seconds. It's really annoying. Regardless though, there it is y'all, Mag Prime perfected, the definitive guide. If you like this one, please consider liking and subbing because it really helps out. A major shout out to my YouTube and Patreon members. Without y'all, I cannot do what I do. Thank you so very much. Mag is honestly gonna get way more playtime from me now because goddamn. Okay, moving on. She's just a really strong frame, and that Tenet Arcoplasmor synergy, I mean, dude, that is so fun. I will see you soon for either a video on the way the elemental augments like Shock Trooper were changed or an Excalibur guide. I'm not quite sure yet. Regardless, it will be soon, within the next 4 days. Probably not as long as this one because I think the audio recording for this is coming out to just under 30 minutes, which is crazy. Anyways, I'll see you soon. Peace.